So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Laura Haynes on the subject of conversion therapy. Should it be banned? Conversion therapy is a pejorative nickname given by opponents to any therapy that's open to a client's goal of decreasing or changing unwanted same-sex attraction or behavior or unwanted incongruent gender identity or expression. And Dr. Haynes is going to present research and other important information that demonstrates these sexual and gender feelings and behaviors are not simply biologically determined, as we're led to believe, that they may have treatable psychological causes and may change through life experience or a person's faith journey or as a result of psychotherapy. So Dr. Laura Haynes is a psychologist. She's retired from clinical practice after 40 years of experience, and she's based in California on the west coast of the US. So it's about 6 a.m. for her there now. She now reviews research and writes and speaks on sexuality and gender internationally, defending the legal right to therapy for people who choose to explore options to their unwanted same-sex attraction or unwanted incongruent gender identity. She's served as an expert advisor for professional organizations, for legislators, for the courts, for UN delegates and high-level government officials. And Dr. Haynes is a general board member and the US country representative for the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice. Her degrees in psychology and theology include 3 master's degrees and also a PhD. So, Dr. Haynes, it's a great pleasure to have you today on ICMDA webinars, and we look forward to hearing your talk. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Peter. I so appreciate your invitation and this opportunity to meet with all of you. And I send to the International Christian Medical and Dental Association greetings from my organization, the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice. All right, so here's the topic, conversion therapy, should it be banned? And I'm subtitling it just to give a little clue of what my answer is, protecting the right to therapy. Everyone should have the right to walk away from sexual or gender practices and experiences that don't work for them and have support to do so. That's my theme today. And I'm going to share with you 5 common reasons why people want to resolve their unwanted same-sex attractions or gender incongruence. And 4 of these have been expressed previously by Dr. Joseph Nicolosi Jr., who is the originator of reintegrative therapy. Reason number 1 for wanting this change allowing therapy is that some men and women adopted an LGBT identity and they lived as LGBT and had LGBT experiences, but ultimately they did not find it fulfilling. They found it unfulfilling and they want change. And they, not the state, should decide their sexuality and gender. A therapy ban that politicians and LGBT activists and professional organizations want would demand they must stay gay. And this is micromanaging their sexuality and gender for them. The Royal College of Psychiatrists says the provision of any intervention purporting to treat something that is not a disorder is wholly unethical. Really? I mean, does the Royal College of Psychiatrists think marital counseling is unethical? How about bereavement counseling? Is employment dissatisfaction counseling ethical? In fact, 10 UK professional organizations, including the Royal College itself, admit they approve of treatment for all of these that are not disorders. In their conversion therapy consensus statement, they say, people visit therapists for all sorts of different reasons. Bereavement employment, or relationship difficulties are just some of the common reasons why people seek specialist support. So we see that dissatisfaction, and not only a disorder, is an ethical basis for counseling. But as we will also see later on, not all professional organizations that say that same-sex sexuality and incongruent gender identity are normal say they are invariably normal. But people do have the right to walk away from sexual and gender experiences they found unfulfilling, and they should be able to have help to do so. Reason for therapy number 2, adverse childhood experiences. We know that some individuals suffered child abuse and disorders, resulting in conflict and confusion and a lot of pain, and unwanted same-sex or gender feelings or behaviors they feel were forced on them, and they wish to resolve. They feel they do not represent their authentic self. Professional organization statements and robust research affirm that these experiences, sexual and gender experiences, are not simply biologically determined. They may have treatable psychological causes, and they can change for many. First, let's look at genes. Most of us are probably aware of the definitive gene study that came out in 2019. The researchers looked at the genes of nearly 500,000 people and concluded there's no single gay gene that determines same-sex behavior or attraction. And they found there is no gay gene on the X chromosome, as some had expected, had thought there would be. Here's what they said. Behavioral traits like sexual behavior and orientation are only partially genetic in nature. They are also shaped in large part by a person's environment and life experiences, which may include culture, society, family or individual experiences, or non-genetic biological influences. Now, to take into account both genetic and biological influences, let's take a look at it for a moment at identical twin studies. Identical twins share genes and prenatal biological influences, such as prenatal hormones, prenatal maternal factors, number of older brothers. Some have related that to biological factors or epigenetics. In identical twins, 100% of the time, they are the same sex. Sex is biologically determined and can never change. Sex is born that way and can't change. By contrast, if one identical twin has same-sex attraction or behavior, the other twin does also in 14% of the time of twin pairs. If one identical twin is living as another sex, the other is also doing that in about 28% of the cases, but that number is expected to come down when we have more numbers of these twins. If one twin has same-sex sexuality and cross-sex behavior, the other twin usually has neither. So these traits are not biologically determined. Most theories of biological causes of same-sex attraction, or I may add gender incongruence, claim that biological influences cause same-sex attraction or behavior or incongruent gender identity. But that's not really what they're saying. They are actually claiming such factors cause a boy to be born less masculine or a girl to be born more masculine. But these traits do not equal same-sex attraction or incongruent gender identity. There have to be more influences to get to same-sex sexuality or gender incongruence. Now, such gender atypical characteristics may lead to social experiences. For example, challenges in parent-child attachment or peer bullying or rejection. And so you may get an interaction of biological predisposition with social influences that actually take that person to those such experiences. So same-sex attraction and behavior are not simply determined by biological influences, and nor is gender incongruence. But for now, let's look at, can same-sex attraction and behavior change? I will refer to the APA Handbook of Sexuality and Psychology. It comes in 2 volumes. This is my copy. The American Psychological Association declared in this handbook, they gave it their imprimatur or their seal of authority, their approval, their official approval, and declared it authoritative. The handbook says research on sexual minorities has long documented that many recall having undergone notable shifts in their patterns of sexual attractions, behaviors, or identities over time. And over the course of life, individuals experience the following: changes or fluctuations in sexual attractions, behaviors, and romantic partnerships. This is what I think is the best study on sexual attraction change over time, conducted in the United States in 2012. Researchers, it's a nationally representative and large study. Researchers asked participants when they were ages 18 and 20 through 24 to rate their sexual attraction along a scale that goes from heterosexual exclusively to mostly heterosexual to bisexual to mostly homosexual and to exclusively homosexual. But there were almost no mostly homosexual people, so they put the mostly homosexual people into the exclusive homosexual group. They then asked the participants about 6 years later, when they were about ages 24 to 36, to rate their sexual attraction again, so the researchers could see if there had been any change. There were people who changed in every category. Not many heterosexuals changed, but those who did changed to mostly heterosexual. Many mostly heterosexual people changed mostly to heterosexual. Bisexuals usually changed mostly toward or to heterosexual. And even some homosexuals, it came to experience opposite sex attraction through life experience. Out of every 12 to 13 men, and little more than 1 in 4 lesbians. And among the homosexual men, their changes were mostly to heterosexual, 7%, the other 2% to bisexual. The lesbians changed, they they change to all of the other categories, but mostly heterosexual. One kind of change this study cannot show, but we see in therapy, is that some same-sex attracted people who do not come to experience opposite sex attraction do experience that their same-sex attraction decreases or completely falls away. Through therapy, we don't know to what extent this may happen through life experience, and that has not been studied. So same-sex attraction and behavior are not simply biologically determined, and they can change. They also may develop from potentially treatable psychological influences. The APA Handbook of Sexuality and Psychology says, and this is a screenshot, biological explanations, however, do not entirely explain sexual orientation. Psychoanalytic contingencies or influences are evident as main effects. That means standalone factors or in interaction with biological factors. The handbook also says and these are screenshots, childhood sexual abuse has associative and potentially causal links to having same-sex partners for some. They based this conclusion on research that includes a 30-year study of documented cases of childhood sexual abuse. They said that men with documented histories of childhood sexual abuse had 6.75 times greater odds than, or more likelihood of ever having same-sex partners. And there was a trend in this direction for women. Of course, not everyone who has same-sex feelings or behavior was sexually abused, and not everyone who has been sexually abused develops same-sex attraction or behavior. And some people who do have these sexual experiences were abused after they had them. But some people do feel their same-sex attraction or behavior was forced on them by childhood sexual abuse. So we see that same-sex attraction and behavior are not simply inborn or determined by biological influences. They may change for many, and they have treatable psychological causes. Now, is the same true for incongruent gender identity? Well, at least 14 professional organizations, including at least 10 endocrine societies around the world, agree that gender identity has social environmental causes. It's not just biologically caused by genes, hormones, or brain structures. And I document all of this on the slide. The Endocrine Society with its 6 co-sponsoring organizations in their guideline and more. Now, the Global Disorders of Sexual Development Consortium Consensus Statement Update in 2016, I understand, is a highly regarded global consensus statement of endocrine societies around the world. And these organizations said in their latest consensus statement, there is no consistent evidence that brain structures are different for gender incongruent people or gender congruent people. And masculine or feminine aspects of the brain largely develop gradually, meaning after birth, in interaction with psychological, social, and cultural experiences in the environment. So incongruent gender identity is not simply biologically determined. Can it change? Children usually grow out of gender dysphoria by late adolescence or adulthood if allowed to. According to at least 9 organizations, and among them, they rate this at 75% to 98% resolve. Overwhelmingly, children resolve. There's been an effort to erase this research, and that effort has been well critiqued and debunked. I give you the reference on this slide. Gender dysphoria can change through the lifespan, according to the British Psychological Society guideline, which says gender dysphoria can fluctuate over years, not infrequently increasing or decreasing in midlife and later in life. By the way, this guideline is referred to in a document called the Memorandum of Understanding. It's a document in the United Kingdom where 20 professional organizations, LGBT activist organizations, and the National Health Services for United Kingdom, two National Health Services, government agencies, signed a statement together which directs all these organizations sign on, and it directs them to use this British psychological guideline for their training. So gender dysphoria can fluctuate throughout the lifespan over the years. Researchers, therapists, and clients should be able, in principle, they should be able to identify factors that are leading to these changes. So incongruent gender identity is not biologically determined, and it can change. It may have treatable psychiatric causes. And even organizations that may say gender incongruence is normal also may say it may be pathological. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health says in its standards of care, gender dysphoria may be secondary to and better accounted for by other diagnoses. And the British Psychological Society's guideline, which I just referred to, says desire to change same-sex may be symptomatic of a psychiatric condition. Remember, these 20 organizations in the United Kingdom signed on to use this guideline for their training. The American Psychiatric Association Task Force said gender dysphoric adolescents should be screened for trauma as well as for any disorder that may produce gender confusion. And in these cases, these organizations do not recommend medical gender interventions such as hormones or surgeries. So if therapy conversations to help people resolve their gender incongruence or gender dysphoria is banned, there will be, for these people, there will be no treatment available except helping them cope with going on living with it. Research shows gender incongruence is associated with high rates of psychiatric disorders, including neurodevelopmental disorders, suicide and suicidality. This is found in the several studies in the US, 6 European countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Iran. There may be more, and if someone on this, watching this knows of more research that shows this in other countries, please mention that in the Q&A, question and answer time. Research supports that psychiatric conditions may be causes, and a US multi-state private health maintenance organization conducted exemplary research. They used the electronic medical records kept in real time of all 8.8 million members at sites in locations in Northern California, Southern California, and Georgia over 8 years. And they found that the prevalence of psychiatric disorders lifetime for gender non-congruent children and adolescents before first medical evidence of gender non-congruence was far higher than for peers who accept or identify with their sex. As you can see here, for children ages 3 to 9, about a third of them had psychiatric disorders before first medical evidence of gender incongruence, whereas few children who were gender congruent had psychiatric disorders. Adolescents ages 10 to 17 usually had psychiatric disorders before first medical record evidence of gender incongruence. And again, adolescents who identify with their sex had few psychiatric disorders in comparison. During the 6 months before gender discordance in adolescence, depression was up to 23 to 24 times higher. Suicidal ideation was up to 45 to 54 times higher. And self-inflicted injuries were up to 70 to 144 times higher. We also have similar findings in Finland. The researchers there looked at adolescent applicants for sex reassignment services at one of Finland's 2 national centers for these services over 2 years. And they found 75%, about the same as in that US study, had psychiatric treatment for reasons other than gender dysphoria during their lifetime. Severe psychopathology preceding onset of gender dysphoria was common, and the recorded comorbid disorders were thus severe and could seldom be considered secondary to gender dysphoria. So we have international research in agreement. This Finland study also found that bullying with mental disorders came before gender incongruence. 57% of the adolescents had been significantly bullied at school. 92% of these were bullied before gender incongruence. 73% were bullied for reasons unrelated to gender. 49%, nearly half, had been persistently bullied before gender incongruence. And that bullying was associated with peer isolation, anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicidal preoccupation if not attempts. These adolescents had very high expectations that gender medical procedures would solve their problems in social, academic, occupational, and mental health areas. Therapy cannot cause pre-existing problems. So obviously, change exploring therapy for gender identity could not cause these conditions that precede the therapy. But these problems, bullying, depression, anxiety, suicidal feelings, feelings of isolation, neurodevelopmental disorders, and so on, could cause thoughts about gender identity. Nationally representative studies have found social and medical affirmation do not decrease suicides or psychiatric disorders in gender incongruent individuals. Finland's recommendation for treatment says that since reduction of psychiatric symptoms cannot be achieved with hormonal and surgical interventions, it is not a valid justification for gender reassignment. Very important research in Sweden and the Netherlands agrees, and I'd love to share that with you during the question and answer if you're interested. The recommendation says that treatment should aim to reduce or resolve gender dysphoria by aiming to reduce or resolve predisposing disorders. That says the first line of treatment for gender dysphoria includes treatment of premorbid disorders that may predispose a young person to the onset of gender dysphoria. This is exactly what therapists in the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice do, and pastors support, and what conversion therapy bans would criminalize. These victims should have the right to heal. And by the way, I understand right now in Finland, there has begun an effort to criminalize this therapy recommended by the Finland treatment recommendation. The reason for therapy, number 3, is personal beliefs. Some people want therapy or faith-based resources to help them live according to the faith of their heart, to practice their religion. The Royal College of Psychiatrists says the college holds the view that lesbian, gay, and bisexual people have exactly similar rights and responsibilities as all other citizens. This includes freedom to practice a religion. Yet in the United Kingdom, the National LGBT Survey labeled faith organization or group as the #1 provider by far of so-called conversion therapy, 51%, and parent, guardian, or family member as the 3rd greatest provider because they practice their religious beliefs, 16%. Healthcare provider or medical professional came in 2nd at 19%. Will politicians take away freedom to practice religion from faith organizations, families, therapists, clients, those who seek help? Will they take children from parents and guardians? These acts are already being attempted or done in some places in the United States, Canada, and New Zealand. What we have seen in the US is that therapy bans were just the first step towards banning freedom of religious speech. This is for therapists, clients, pastors, churches, schools, faith-based organizations, and in some cases, parents. When we saw that, it was a turning point for activisms by leaders of traditional faith. They understood this isn't just about professional therapy. And in defending the rights of pastors and churches, please, let's not throw the therapists and clients away. Their religious freedom to have help to live according to their faith must be protected. Is it true that traditional religious beliefs cause the mental health problems of people who identify as LGBT, as is often claimed? Those who live according to their traditional religion are no less happy, mentally healthy, satisfied with life, and flourishing than those of liberal religions or no religion. This is according to research conducted by an ideologically diverse research team of LGBT affirmative researchers and change affirming researchers working together. A viewpoint change is not required, and a theology change is not required. I wrote a review on this research. I give the reference on this slide. Research on change-oriented therapy is being done in separate subgroups that don't necessarily talk to each other. Non-LGBT identified people are one subgroup, and LGBT identified people are a different subgroup. The non-LGBT identified people, that is, those who have same-sex attraction or maybe sometimes behavior, don't accept an LGBT identity. And these people are largely conservative, Orthodox people. In contrast to LGBT identified people who believe their sexual feelings are caused by biology. The non-LGBT identified put their religious identity first. They think their sexual feelings are something they have, not who they are. The non-LGBT identified have far greater participation in religious services. And religion and spirituality are significantly and positively linked to health for them. Whereas there's close to no such link for LGBT identified individuals. The non-LGBT identified likely get community support from their religious community, while LGBT identified likely get their support from the LGBT community. The non-LGBT identified are no less healthy than LGBT identified, contrary to minority stress theory that identifies religion as a source of sexual minority stress. The non-LGBT identified emphasize chastity and heterosexual relationships as their goals. And what is very important, they report nearly all change-oriented therapy goals as substantially more helpful versus harmful. Therapy bans are attacks on religion around the world. No one should take away anyone's freedom and right to live and love according to the faith of their heart and their beliefs. Politicians should not go after religious therapists, clients, pastors, churches, and families. Reason for therapy number 4, to save a marriage and family. Some same-sex attracted people are in opposite-sex relationships with a spouse and children they love, and they want help in order to not stray, and to save their family and be full-time moms and dads, and to do so more easily and happily. For some, gender incongruent identity or expression is putting their marriage or family at risk of breakup. Do same-sex attracted people who are in a relationship with the opposite sex represent a very common situation? Well, as a matter of fact, most same-sex attracted people are both sex attracted. The APA Handbook of Sexuality and Psychology says, hence directly contrary to the conventional wisdom, individuals with non-exclusive patterns of attraction are indisputably the norm, and those with exclusive same-sex attractions are the exception. Most both-sex attracted people, according to research, are attracted to people who, most both-sex attracted people who are in a relationship are in an opposite sex relationship, where they may experience satisfaction that is real, and in a satisfying opposite sex relationship, their opposite sex attraction may increase and their same-sex attraction may decrease. Therapists help people have satisfying relationships. Therefore, therapists may help people shift or change their sexual attraction. There's so much interesting research behind everything I just said on this slide, and here I give you references. Nationally representative polls in the United Kingdom and Canada show that people support change exploring therapy, and I give you these numbers as well. Reason number 5 for therapy: to reduce risky behavior and the desire to engage in it. People should have the right to reduce behavior that is unhealthy, unsafe to self, others, their marriage or family, unlawful, unfulfilling, a symptom of a trauma or a psychiatric disorder, or for whatever reason a person desires without requiring government approval for their reason, and regardless of whether it is directed toward the opposite sex or the same sex, or is gender congruent or gender incongruent, without discrimination. In fact, there are effective therapies to decrease risky same-sex behavior. Several standard therapies conducted by gay affirming therapists have been shown by gay affirming researchers in replicated, randomized, longitudinal, controlled trials to significantly decrease casual same-sex behavior and maintain the change. Same-sex behavior can significantly decrease through standard therapies, and bans will criminalize gay affirmative therapists for saving lives. Men who had children and men who had a negative view of men having sex with men especially significantly decreased casual same-sex behavior through these therapies. These may want to save their marriage and family or live by their faith. People who experience same-sex feelings or behavior or incongruent gender identity or expression should have the same freedom and right as everyone else to leave sexual or gender practices and experiences that are unfulfilling for them to heal sexual or gender feelings and behaviors caused by traumas or disorders, to live and love according to their religion, to save their marriage and family, and to preserve their health and life. No one should take these rights away from them. More research shows change exploring therapy is safe and effective. A study by Blosnich and colleagues initially claimed that harm therapy to explore change to same-sex attraction and behavior caused harm. They followed the usual recipe of biased methods in these kinds of studies, and I will be happy to tell you what this recipe is in the Q&A if you're interested, but I'll tell you some of them now as I go along. But however, despite those problems, biased methods, they did claim to be the first nationally representative study of LGBT identified people. So they did not include any gender incongruent people. And since they only studied LGBT identified people, they excluded formerly LGBT identified people and non-LGBT identified people. So they excluded people who may have successfully changed by research design. This is the usual way harm therapy is done. They had data, unlike any other study I know of that I can think of. They had data on suicidal thoughts, plans, intentions, and attempts before therapy and after so-called conversion therapy. But they intentionally did not use the before therapy data. They only asked suicidal rates in the present, then inferred the therapy caused them. This is the usual biased recipe. They ignored that rates before therapy may have been higher, and therapy may have reduced them. This is research malpractice conducted in virtually every contemporary harm claiming study I can think of. When another researcher, Sullins, included the before therapy data, the results showed change exploring therapy reduced suicidality for both minors and adults, and dramatically so for adults. Therefore, since this is the first nationally representative study to our knowledge, the generalization can now rightfully be made. Conversion therapy is safe for participants who do not change. The claim that when people do not change, it makes them suicidal is not supported by research data gathered by gay affirming researchers, even though they didn't use all of their data. If former LGBTs identified people had been included, it is likely the benefit would have been even greater. This study is a game changer and should be referenced in all of our letters and articles in support of change allowing therapy. This study, there's a naturalistic quasi-experimental longitudinal study for faith-based ministries. There's no study like this that claims to support harm or ineffectiveness. This is the best quality design study. And it found that a majority, these are people who are in faith-based ministries. Some of them also had psychotherapy. They were in ministries that were available in locations where they lived. A majority changed as desired, and psychological symptoms only improved. No harm, no evidence of harm. This is the best study on faith-based ministries. Nothing compares, especially that faith and sexuality study in the UK. This is better. This is the best study. A century of research has reported people change same-sex attraction and behavior through therapy. And this is a recent study of 125 men. Most were religious, but not all. And their same-sex attraction, behavior, and orientation identity all significantly decreased. More than 2/3 decreased same-sex attraction, starting at close to almost entirely homosexual on average and changing to bisexual on average. That kind of a partial change is all it takes to enable someone to be sexually abstinent or live in an opposite sex relationship as they desire. A change from exclusively homosexual to exclusively heterosexual is not required, nor do we guarantee that kind of change. A partial change can change a life and save a family. 41% of these men were married, nearly all with children, on average 3 children each. The number of these men engaging in same-sex behavior before therapy was 71% and plunged to 14% after therapy. What this means to these men, their wives, and their children can hardly be expressed. For them and for all of the participants overall, depression and suicidal thoughts and attempts significantly decreased. Few reported harmful effects. Psychological benefits greatly outweighed any harms. So this study did look at benefits and harms, and that's what it found. Research on representative samples is needed to tell, using psychotherapy, to tell us what the results would be for the general population. Two of the most comprehensive research reviews on change exploring therapy have been conducted by gay affirming researchers, that was in the American Psychological Association, and change affirming researchers, they were researchers in the United States, a professional organization of change exploring researchers, therapists. Many position statements of professional organizations are based on one or both of these reviews. Both accept that research participants reported they reduced or changed same-sex attraction and behavior through non-aversive standard therapies. And these reviews agree there is no research that meets scientific standards that proves non-aversive change exploration therapy is unsafe or ineffective. This is still true to this day. Okay, so we see Finland's, with regard to treatment for gender incongruence, those studies were about sexual orientation. Finland's first line recommendation is treating psychiatric disorders predisposing an adolescent to gender incongruence. Research on either body harming medical gender interventions or psychotherapy to help gender dysphoric people become comfortable with their sex is in its infancy. At this time, case studies provide the best available guidance and evidence that some people do become able to embrace their body through therapy. I include a reference to a chart of such case studies on this slide. These medical and mental health professional organizations have supported a client's right to psychotherapy that is open to a client's goal of change in same-sex attraction or behavior or gender identity or expression. We are always happy to add to this list. You will see it includes my organization, the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice, representing people, therapists around the world, the International Federation of Catholic Medical Associations that has about 62 member organizations around the world, and more. It is the claim that there is a professional organization consensus in opposition to change exploring therapy is invalid. Our organizations demonstrate that. People who reduced or changed unwanted same-sex sexuality or unwanted gender incongruence, if they had been deterred from help by a therapy ban, would not be able to live the life they desire and live today. Please hear them. Everyone should have the right to walk away from sexual or gender feelings or practices that do not work for them and have help to live the way that brings them health and happiness. No one should take away this right from them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Haynes. So we've been listening to, if you've joined us during this presentation, to Dr. Laura Haynes speaking on conversion therapy, should it be banned, an incredibly comprehensive review, argued not just on the basis of human rights, that people should have a right to walk away from treatments which are unhelpful, but also deeply evidence-based with all the references to the literature that you want on the subject. So we've just got time for a couple of questions, probably, Dr. Haynes, but if I can just ask you, first of all, is there any research on what LGBT persons who've undergone successful conversions consider as the cause of their past LGBT orientation? Any data on that question?
There are qualitative studies in which they ask these kinds of questions of the participants. And, they did list things like childhood sexual abuse, difficulties in attachment with their parent, the usual things that we know that are being denied, they identified. There's just so much research to share, but people can, let's see, if someone wants to send you an email, Peter, to ask for research on a particular topic, and you could pass it along to me, maybe I could give them those references. Also, a way to get references for these kinds of things, the IFTCC website, the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice, my organization, the IFTCC.org website has lots of documents and videos with research I've given and others, training for those who give pastoral caretakers, faith-based ministries. We train. Our conference is coming up October 15 through 17. It's by invitation only. Obviously, we don't open it up to anyone. But if you're interested, send an email to Peter and he can tell me you're okay to be invited. We're going to have attorneys from around the world who will be discussing how to deal with these bans. We'll have former LGBT people. We're training them as activists. So this is training not only for how to do therapy and pastoral care, but also legal challenging. And, it's journalists attend. So any interested parties who want real solid research and good arguments and training and methods and approaches, sign up for this conference. It's not expensive. And if you can't attend at that time, you'll have access to the videos. You can't go to the workshops that won't be recorded, but you can get the plenary sessions and maybe some of the workshops I'll be presenting. So you have ways to get more research, more of these research questions answered. And one more link to get the research to answer these questions is therapyequality.org/harms of therapy bans. It's a website I maintain. I condense research findings and arguments into 2 pages. You can use this as a letter to send to members of parliament, or you can adapt it to send, and it has footnotes that document everything. The footnotes are like reading an extensive paper, but the main body of it is just 2 pages.
Often, Laura, we get the arguments that we hear in the popular media and so on are about extreme forms of so-called conversion therapy. Often it's corrective rape or ECT and that kind of stuff that caricaturizes the broad range of therapies available. And yet the legislation we're seeing is very wide-ranging, broad reach legislation that is seeking to ban not just these practices, but also things that we would class as preaching, praying, parenting, pastoral counseling, and so on, that are just normal behavior in churches. Can you give us any advice about the best way of countering these sorts of outlandish claims on the media, and sadly also from professional bodies, especially for those of us who are involved in advocacy in this area?
The American Psychological Association's task force that looked at change allowing research therapy in 2009 said that contemporary change allowing therapists do not use aversive methods. So there is evidence right there. Do not use aversive methods. I have talked to other therapists in our professional organizations internationally and faith-based ministries internationally. I certainly know people who are in these roles around the world. And I have yet to meet someone who's ever done these things or knows someone who's done them. I've been astounded. I've sat in legislative hearings listening to a testimony that these things were done, and I have never ceased to be amazed at the things that I've done that I never knew I did. And that's the same for all of us in these organizations, in our organizations. Sometimes it's really hard for me not to say, I bet you had a big laugh when you sat in your chairs and thought of that one. I mean, it's just, so if any of these things actually happen to someone and God forbid they ever did, presenting them as characteristic of what we do, that's deception. That's a lie. They need to prove it. They need to prove that that is characteristic of what any of us does. It is not. And there are already laws everywhere against those kinds of things. A therapy ban isn't needed to deal with that kind of stuff. And we don't do that.
Thank you very much. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to draw it to a close. I'm sure we could go on for another hour with questions, but we sadly can't do that. It just remains to me really to thank you, Dr. Haynes, for a fantastic presentation, for all of you for coming along to, and please do continue to visit our website, make use of past webinars, and sign up for future ones. So it's goodbye from me, Dr. Peter Saunders, and God bless you. Thank you.